So what you guys been up to since last?
Lots of yoga for me.
Nothing.
I'm doing yoga teacher training.
Wow, cool.
So, yeah, it was kind of like a last minute thing. One of my really good friends from Boulder was like, "Hey man, I'm doing this teacher training thing, and you should do it too. It's going to take 2 months." And I was like, "I don't know if I really want to spend 2 months in Colorado." So I took like a week, and then I was like, you know what? Why not? It's really nice in Colorado in the summer. And, I could actually use just like yoga every day. It's been really good. Like I've been just getting more and more flexible, and my mind feels a lot clearer, and
Interesting.
I just feel like I'm making a lot of progress. So good stuff. Plus I found this thing.
Yeah, man.
A softball for rolling out your joints and your spine.
My backpack from it.
Dude, speaking of rolling, it's been one of my hobbies for the past few years to figure out how to roll out all that soft tissue, whether it's like your quads, your hamstrings, your glutes. For me, I've got a lot of problems like right here in my neck that tend to kind of make my head, pulls it forward a lot. So I've just kind of developed different methods of being able to roll out all kinds of stuff.
Have you ever tried your spine? Just like right on your spine.
Oh yeah, I've got a lacrosse ball. You know what I'm talking about, like a hard rubber ball. It's real similar to the one you have, but it's a little bit smaller. Yeah, and pretty much every day I'll roll out my spine.
Yeah, for me,
at some point here in the next few months, I think I'm going to start a podcast where I basically show people how to do this, because some of the things to get some of the muscles that I figured out, like some of these things are not like necessarily the easiest thing to figure out. And there's some criteria that you want to meet when you're doing trigger point therapy that I didn't really find the information out there. I kind of had to figure it out. Like, for example, if you're rolling out, say, your quads, right? You need to put your quads. You don't want to have them. You don't want to have them in a unflexed or in a shortened position. Whenever you do trigger point therapy, you want to actually have that muscle group lengthened and then put the pressure on it. Because if you don't, you're just not going to get nearly as much progress from it.
Well, it depends. It depends on how deep you want to go. If you lengthen the muscle before you put pressure on it, then you should be able to. Yeah, you'll get that muscle. Or let's see.
Yeah.
Like one of them goes deep.
If you're trying to hit a muscle group, the most effective way is to lengthen the muscle and then put the pressure on it. If it's shortened and then you put pressure, you're not going to get nearly as much benefit. You're not going to get the flexibility. Yeah. One of the things actually that when it comes to yoga, I found that a lot of people will do yoga for years at a time, and they won't make a whole lot of progress necessarily in certain positions and flexibility, because in yoga, to hit a lot of those positions sort of requires that you have the flexibility already, right? And so in some cases, what you have to do is really focus on the muscle group that's tight and the joint that's tight. And once that is opened up, then you can start doing stretching. Then you can start doing more of the yoga poses to a better effect.
Yeah. I don't think it's true that you have to already be flexible to do a pose. If you can get into the pose, then you're gonna get more flexibility. Especially if you're activating the right things and you're breathing in the right way. You have to be doing it correctly, and you have to be like a lot of times, like in downward dog, for instance, you can push out with your hands and feet, or you can also pull in with your hands and feet. And you can also play around with like the curvature of your spine, and you can play around with filling up and deflating your lungs. And basically you just play around with everything. Eventually you'll hit something where you feel like there's some progress being made. But yeah, if you just kind of sit in the posture and don't really play around with it, you could end up in a position where you don't make any progress for a while. Yeah, for sure.
It's interesting, like just all the different muscles and all the different joints that like you just don't even think about with like conventional exercising. Like, I don't know, I read a book a couple months ago about vision, And it's called Seeing Without Glasses. And the point of the book is basically that there's exercises you can do to naturally improve your eyesight. And it's all about kind of training the muscles of your eyes. Because there's like a muscle inside your eye and there's muscles around your eyes. And so it's like, the idea is that if you have like a vision problem, you can compensate for it by really training those muscles to be able to just like focus really well. And it's like, you never really think about like, I guess yoga.
I read a book similar to that quite a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, they talked about you do exercises, like you'll focus on a point far off in the corner, and then you'll generalize your focus to your peripheral. And they talked about like doing a massage, like massaging your eyeball and all around your eye to help those muscles relax when they need to.
Might be the same. Yeah. Sounds similar.
It might be, yeah. The guy he claimed that he was an optometrist and that he had actually corrected his eyesight back to 20/20 from after years of wearing glasses.
Yeah, it's the same book. It's Seeing Without Glasses.
Cool.
Awesome. Yeah.
Do you know the guy's name? I can't remember. It's been so long since I read it.
I could Google it.
Juan, are you on that?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah. Are you going to be our Google guy?
Half an hour. Okay.
I see you like researching furiously.
He didn't do his homework. He's trying to finish the book.
He's just reading 12 Rules for Life.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, God, I read that a few months back. You guys are gonna have to jog my memory on that.
Yeah. I swear. Okay, wait. The guy's name is Roberto Kaplan. I'll link to it under the video. I guess this is
cool.
This is like a pre-chat.
So to kind of add what you were talking about, Ariel, with like all these little random muscles and how we don't pay attention to them. One thing that I've been discovering recently is how the jaw is actually structural. Like you can act like your head is actually structural. Like you should be able to support weight on your chin, and that's all connected to your head. That's all connected to your neck. And so some people do this thing called craniosacral therapy, where like, I don't know, they get like the muscles up here, like the muscles of the jaw, the muscles of like the behind the ears and stuff, like palpated, and it helps release tension. And I think what's happening is that basically people don't use the muscles in that way very often, because we're constantly just sitting there and our neck is just in one position. We're just holding it up. But people can do headstands. Like if you exercise the muscles in your neck and your head, they get stronger, and they can, they're very strong muscles. So
what's an exercise that we can do to build those muscles?
I mean, so for me, what I've been doing, and you gotta go slow because you can actually injure your neck. And this is one of those things where like doctors will be like, and actually they're telling me in yoga right now, like, don't ever tell your students to do this because they can hurt their neck and then they'll sue you and whatever. But if you're careful, you can strengthen those muscles. So one of the things that helps is back bends. So there's muscles all up here, just like there are all the way down your spine. It's the same thing. It's just smaller vertebrae and smaller muscles. So supporting weight on the back of your head. So like, just doing something like this, and just like pulling up on your head, that'll strengthen the muscles in the back of your neck. And then for the side of your head, you can roll it out like this. And then, like I said, your chin can also support weight. And actually, I was doing this last night. I was like going different positions with your chin. My chin can actually go all the way down to my neck, and it actually protects the neck. And so you can like you can imagine, we evolved to be able to like wrestle, with each other and with like animals, and climb through, climb through things and climb over things and get out of tight spaces. And so, the head is actually a bigger component in that than people give it credit for. So.
Interesting.
And like I said, like this, you can stretch that really far.
Wow. So wait, what muscle are you going for with the chin? Like, is it?
So there's all these jaw muscles, like back in here that go up to your head.
Okay.
And I felt them like massively stretch out yesterday, and it was really it really relaxed my head. Like I felt like my head was like less tense afterwards.
Cool.
Yeah. No, but like you were saying, I mean, there's basically just muscles, like tiny little muscles everywhere. Your body's just encased in muscles. I actually went to a cadaver lab for this yoga teacher training, which was really, really just mind blowing. Just being able to actually see all those muscles physically is just, there's no substitute for that. So yeah, I mean, your whole body is just encased in muscles, and like most of them we don't use at all, or very rarely. But it turns out that you can work all of them out and strengthen them. So yeah. Anyway, so I guess we should talk about Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, let's do it.
Stand up straight with your shoulders back. That has to do with muscles. That's a good segue, right? Oh, except I'm lying down. No, I'm doing it wrong.
Okay.
Exercising rule 2 or what?
Yeah, stand up straight with your shoulders back. I love that chapter. I was at a music festival while I was reading that one. After I read that one, and I was just like advising everyone to sit up straight, to stand up straight after that.
It really does change how you feel, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
You feel like I'm presenting my vulnerability a little bit to the world because I'm confident. I'm like not worried that if something happens that I won't be able to deal with it.
Yeah, totally.
This is very protective. You're just like, I want to.
Yeah.
Like, don't hurt me.
I really like what he said at the end. Is it's like he said like, what if you feel like you don't deserve to stand up straight, like you haven't actually won a victory? And he said, when you stand up straight with your shoulders back, you're signaling to the world you're facing being confidently and head on, regardless of what happens. And it's like, I noticed those moments after where it's like, if I feel defeated or I feel like I want to kind of be like slumped over and like sad, it's like instead like choosing to stand up straight, somehow it like always makes the situation better in some way.
You could say that's a victory in and of itself. Just the fact that you are standing up straight and that you're helping your posture, helping your mentality.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I thought it was really interesting how he goes through like evolutionary biology and why animals adopt a protective stance when they've been defeated, and sort of the psychology of that and how that developed over time. I thought that was really, really neat. Lobsters and stuff.
It's interesting because that's one of the things that people critique the most about him. They make the argument that it's not a universal thing across all animals, but I don't know.
It's one of those things that sounds kind of silly when you hear it. You're like, what are you talking about, lobsters and dominance hierarchy? Like, what does a lobster have to do with human psychology? And he draws a very clear parallel. Like we can't deny that. But just from the sound of it, it sounds a little bit ridiculous, kind of like, Alex Jones's gay frogs. There's a point to be made there, but you can make a caricaturization of it, which sort of misses the point if you want to.
I don't remember the gay frogs thing. Do you want to?
Oh, I'd love to do that. I'd love to take that on.
Go for it, Juan.
So apparently, there's evidence that the chloride or whatever the hell, the fluoride they're putting in the water, it's leaking into some rivers or something like that, or ponds, and the frogs were like stopping to reproduce and like doing gay things.
Okay,
something like that.
Somebody turns frogs gay by poisoning them or chemicalizing them or something.
Yeah.
It's basically chemical exposure was changing their expression of both sex, and because I think frogs can be like dimorphic, like they can change sex if there's not enough of the other sex around. And then they were also exhibiting, I guess, more prevalence of homosexual behavior. So, but then it just became gay frogs. They're turning the frogs gay.
It's the birth control. I think it's the birth control on the water. It's like, because it's like women like take the birth control pill and then they pee, and then there's like estrogen. This is basically like the birth control pill is like progesterone and estrogen. It's like.
They did a study recently where there's actually a lot of trace pharmaceuticals in the water supplies for most major cities now because of that exact reason.
Okay.
Whoa.
That's scary.
People flushing pills
All right,
down.
so how does this connect? Sorry, how does this connect back to lobsters? And Jordan?
Oh yeah, and we've gotten far off the beaten path.
Memes. The answer is memes.
Memes.
Okay, I guess we're gonna make a conceptual parallel. It's not really the same actually. It's a different argument because I guess with the frogs, the argument, I guess the parallel they're trying to draw is like, that I guess Alex Jones, I would imagine the point would be that all these chemicals in our environment are messing with people's endocrine systems, like they're messing with the frogs' endocrine systems. So that's like an environmental parallel, whereas like Jordan Peterson with the lobster thing, he's arguing that it's an evolutionary parallel. So
Yeah.
the argument is that there's like, we have this mechanism in our brains, it's like dominance hierarchies and it's connected to the serotonin system.
And the only reason why it would matter is that we share a lot of that ancient kind of like biological infrastructure with both frogs and lobsters. So
with the lobster thing, the argument he's making is that because like people are like, why bring up lobsters? It's so random. But the point of that argument is because we diverged from lobsters so long ago that if us and lobsters both exhibit behaviors of dominance hierarchies, and those behaviors are linked to the serotonin system, then it means that dominance hierarchies are a biologically ancient thing, that they evolved before humans and lobsters diverged.
That was my understanding of it. It's basically Peterson's way of explaining why intersectionality people and people who talk about these dominance hierarchies or any kind of hierarchies are culturally constructed. They're just a human thing. They've only been around for so long.
Yeah.
He's like, no, they've been around for, at least hundreds of millions of years because that's when we diverged from lobsters. So
I do love the way Jordan Peterson can phrase something and actually agree with you. Like what he'll talk to when he talks to maybe extreme leftists and they say, equality is a big problem. And he says, it is a big problem. You're exactly right. It's actually a much bigger problem than you realize because it's not just a cultural construction. This is a biological reality going back millions of years. So you're right, inequality is a huge problem, but we need to recognize the scope of the problem if we're ever going to do anything about it. And it's such a way of like uniting the two sides that it's masterful.
Well, and it's even deeper than that. Like, so listening to Maps of Meaning, I'm on chapter like 9 right now out of 27, and like the depth of thought that this man has done on this stuff is just way more than I thought. I mean, like. So dominance hierarchies are actually part of like the male or the masculine like archetype. It's just like and the all-seeing eye and the government and the state and the and masculinity are all like one side of sort of yin and yang, and the other side is feminine, like darkness, chaos, sort of
nature,
like the undifferentiated, unformed, primordial stuff that then
It's interesting though. Sorry, finish your point, Chris.
The masculine sort of rational thing comes in and like inseminates it or like orders it in some way, and it makes this balanced thing, which is then ideal, I guess.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I'm just not going to try flipping through diagrams and finding them in Maps of Meaning, but it's interesting that in Maps of Meaning, what I didn't understand it at the time, but it sort of makes a little bit more sense to me now, is he distinguishes between the precosmogonic chaos and the unknown. So it's like, and they're both supposed to be like different aspects, I guess, of the feminine.
One is the Ouroboros and one is the mother, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, I feel like I've seen criticisms. I think he simplifies it. He doesn't go into that distinction when he talks usually, or like in 12 Rules for Life. But I thought it's an interesting distinction because some of the criticisms of him are that like he's equating women or like the feminine archetype with like just like undifferentiated chaos. But he actually distinguishes between like the Ouroboros, so like the like the chaos, the undifferentiated chaos at the beginning, and like the Great Mother archetype.
Right.
Which is like not necessarily irrational, just unknown.
Right. And people, exactly. Like people misinterpret what he says because what he's saying is actually really complicated. and like it takes all of these ancient traditions, you know, Sumerians and Egyptians and Indians and Chinese and all this, and he talks about the parallels between all of these different mythologies and how he's not saying that like women are evil or something like that. Like he hears people say like, oh, femininity is associated with chaos because of these ancient stories that have guided whole civilizations as to how to deal with the unknown.
Yeah.
And he's not saying something negative about women. Like that's taking it and just like completely removing all of the details and all of the
yeah, like he's not saying that women are irrational or anything like that. It's like
right.
Because it's also, it's like both archetypes exist in every person.
Exactly.
It's like the yin and the yang. There's like the white dot on the black side and the black dot on the white side.
Right. Exactly. And so two things. The first is that he says that sometimes Ouroboros and the Great Mother are just identified with each other. And like I just listened to this part. I think it was in this chapter where he talks about this. And like sometimes they're kind of conflated together, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're separate things. Mm-hmm. So he's he wants to go as granular as possible. So he's going explaining all the differences between everything.
What's the Ouroboros?
It's here.
It's a self-eating snake.
Ah, yes, the snake that eats itself.
Yeah, and it's just
Here, this is it. It's that's the Ouroboros. The Ouroboros. It's like the snake of the precosmogonic chaos. It's like the nothing at the beginning.
I'm really thinking about going to a bookstore and getting the book so I can look at all these diagrams.
The book is super necessary, I think. It was.
He's describing it really well. Like if you look at the stuff around the diagrams, like the words around the diagrams, he describes what's in the diagrams. But it's you have to use your imagination, and I'm not sure I'm necessarily picturing what he wants me to picture.
Yeah, this book is amazing though. It's like I feel like it changed my perspective quite a bit.
But anyway, so the Ouroboros is just the idea of have you guys played like video games where there's a big map and you start off the game and you just can see like a little piece of the map and then everything outside of it is just gray and like foggy? Like fog
Zelda.
So that's kind of like what Ouroboros is. It's just this stuff that's outside of our experience. And as we live and as we experience, the domain of the known sort of encounters the domain of the unknown, and it discovers it, but also shapes it in a way.
And how do you understand the distinction between the Great Mother archetype of novelty and the Ouroboros?
Okay.
I guess I would tend to think of it in terms of duality. So if there's sort of the prehistoric, pre-formation unknown, there's a feminine side and a masculine side. The Ouroboros, I guess, would be the feminine side of that great unknown, of that chaos. And then like the good matriarchal kind of side would be the positive, the creation aspect of the feminine.
So I've been looking at the go ahead.
You're gonna keep talking.
Yeah, the Greek cosmological tree, the family tree of Greek cosmology. I've been getting into like Greek mythology lately. I don't know why, I find it fascinating. And from their hierarchy of sort of mythology, the first thing that was chaos, and that's the void. And chaos is like a super god, like a titan or a primordial god.
Yeah, and it gives birth to all the other gods.
All of them, right? But it's like a hierarchy of them. So the first generation of gods is Tartarus, which represents the abyss, and that you can maybe think of that as like sort of the the singularity through which things disappear type of thing, or like a, you know, a dark hole, or a something like that, right? That's that phenomenon of the abyss, right? The hole that has no end, in a sense. Right. And then Gaia is the earth, and then that Gaia is associated usually with the earth, but also with kind of like flourishing and sort of birth or rebirth, or like life, right? The blooming of life. Then there's Eros, which is sort of the cosmic, the sort of primordial energy of kind of like sexuality, and it says Eros was the Greek god of sexual attraction. His Roman counterpart is Cupid, or desire. Some myths make him the primordial god, while in other myths he is the son of Aphrodite. He was one of the winged love gods, Erotis. And then you have Erebus, which is darkness. And that's what it says. It's very simply laid out in this sort of Wikipedia kind of cosmology tree. And the other one is Nyx, which is night. So darkness as an entity, and the night as sort of like a more specific version of that darkness, right? And then they end up kind of like having like, children, the sub-gods, and then you end up with this very kind of complex sort of thing. I can go on, but if anybody has any thoughts there.
Yeah, so what I was going to answer your question earlier, Ariel. I was trying to think of the difference between Ouroboros and the mother, and I think what it is that so in the Sumerian creation myth, there's the sort of Ouroboros character who gets, so there's Marduk, and I think it's Tiamat. Tiamat is the mother character, and Marduk is the father character, or also the son character, the knower character. And so the knower, or maybe not character, I should say, maybe the knower archetype, maybe is a better word, takes the chaos and splits it into the earth and the sky. And then subsequent to that, the earth kind of stays as the mother, whereas the sky becomes the father, and the sun becomes like the actual sun becomes the father.
Yeah, like I think the precosmogonic chaos becomes both of them.
Right, exactly. But the precosmogonic chaos is associated with more femininity because it's chaos, because it's unknown, and that's associated with femininity. And then after the what is it called, the cosmogony or whatever, the creation of the universe. He uses a word for that. I forget what the word is, but yeah. After the universe is created, then after that, there's still chaos, but it's sort of a little bit more of a known chaos. And then there's the domain of the known, which is the more masculine side.
Okay, here, I have a question for you guys. I'm wondering if like this idea that like the unknown is feminine, is that inherently true, or is that an inherent aspect of femininity that it's unknown and mysterious, or is that just a male perspective of femininity?
I agree with you. I know you didn't make a statement, but I agree with that. I think I see both, like the yin and the yang. It's within the dark is the light, and within the light is the dark. The unknown, the chaotic, has a feminine quality to it, but it also has a masculine quality to it as well. They're expressed differently. But nonetheless, I would agree with Ariel in a sense that, yeah, that might be the male way of perceiving the feminine, since guys, we don't have an idea what's going on with women. What the hell?
So Peterson specifically addresses that, which is, he's like, well, why is femininity associated with the unknown? And he's like literally the genitalia of male and female, like female genitalia are just like hidden inside. And so like even it like, before the modern era, like even women didn't really know what was going on in there. They were just like, yeah, it's just a hole,
Right.
We don't really know what's inside, babies come out, I guess. But but like the male genitalia is very much on the outside. It's very much visible and very much known. So I think that's what Peterson says. So maybe he's wrong, but I think that's why. And the other thing is, yes, it's probably true that it was like all of these mythologies were mostly written by men. So
here's another metaphor to talk about that. So Gaia, which is the most feminine, like explicitly sort of feminine archetype of the Greek mythology, is earth, and earth is sort of like, earth literally means like the dirt, like the ground, right? And then when you plant seeds, you literally put a seed in a hole and cover it in the darkness, and then magic happens, and then something blooms, right?
Right.
So like you can find these things.
It's like a black box. Yeah. Step 1.
I mean,
Step 2, question mark. Step 3, new life.
There is magic in a lot of it too, though. Like you can.
It's not quite like planting a seed in the ground, though. Like that's kind of the Greek metaphor for. That was what the Greeks thought that like reproduction was. That it was just like the male seed and the female earth. So they didn't think that there was any hereditary that was contributed by the mother. That it was all just like came through the father.
Right.
And it's
like obviously wrong though.
Well, it's
except
not really,
when the sex of the baby was not a male.
That's what they believed. I mean, they didn't realize that the female contributes half the hereditary.
But I mean, you can just
the only thing women got blamed for
like,
was
they
the
look
baby
like their
was
mom.
born. They couldn't produce a male. The only thing women got blamed for there was the inability to produce a male, right? Like, so like you're saying that they didn't have women weren't regarded as contributing to sort of the genetic makeup of the child, but then ironically they would get blamed if she failed to produce any male heirs.
And ironically, that's like the one thing that is actually 100%. Well, maybe not 100%, but like
the male's fault.
But that is the male's fault,
sperm's
basically.
Actually, based on fertility timing, you can actually influence the sex of your child by somewhere between like 75 and 80%, depending on when you actually have sex.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you're saying like the sex of your sperm like varies throughout the day?
No, it's about the woman. It's about her ovulation cycle. Male sperm tend to swim faster, but they die faster. Female sperm swim slower, but they have longevity. So depending on where she's at in her ovulation cycle, if she's say 3 days out, your sperm can survive for a few days. So if you only have sex, say 3 or 4 days out, then most of the male sperm are going to die, and the females have a much higher chance of fertilizing.
It wouldn't be a day-night thing, but rather a moon cycle sort of situation.
An ovulation cycle.
Yeah.
If you want to make the moon analogous to ovulation cycle, then yeah.
And they now think like the egg plays a much more active role than they used to think. Like the egg kind of selects between sperm and picks the one that's the best.
As it is on the macro level as well.
That makes sense.
I have a friend whose mom always told her, she said, don't worry, you were born a champion. You already got #1 out of like millions.
Out of like 14 million, yeah.
Wow.
It's true.
Yeah.
Okay, there's like so much to unpack here. I feel like we're like not going to get that far in the next hour, but it's like it's the whole. So it's basically everything we're saying is based on the assumption that there's like this these biological categories of male and female, and that they have certain characteristics, and that those characteristics, this biological reality, like produces these categories of masculine and feminine, and that there's like archetypal similarities across all cultures between those two polarities. Because of the biological reality we all share. Like, that's basically the assumption behind this whole thing, right?
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, so I think a lot of this comes out of just dualities. A lot of this just comes out of like the need for the human mind to draw lines between things. And so the line between males and females is very easy to draw because it's very obvious and visible.
A lot of people question it.
Question what?
Like the sexual dimorphism, really, or like what's called like the gender binary. There's like sex is like male and female, and gender is like masculine and feminine. And then it's not really clear where men and women.
Oh yeah.
To be honest, I didn't really get a whole lot of sort of gender dimorphism when going through maps of meaning. That almost seems like sort of secondary to just his broader concept of meaning is ascribed on sort of a relative basis for the organism that have roots in biology, which both give rise to myths, mythologies, and traditions, and then the traditions inform our actions, kind of in a cycle. But in terms of like, I mean, obviously male and female is a separation that occurs right throughout life and is sort of a given. I didn't really see maps of meaning as necessarily the point. I didn't really see it as attempting to be illustrative of the difference between men and women as much as illustrative of the general biological origins of mythology and tradition and behavior.
Yeah. The whole point of maps of meaning, as far as I can tell, is explaining not what there is or what there was, but how people thought about stuff, how people used stories in order to approach the unknown, right? So just because a person is a particular biological gender doesn't mean that you can necessarily know their whole personality. It just means that you might be able to infer some things about it.
It does say though that like these biological realities of male and female, like what you're saying, like you said that like the argument is that like the femininity is associated with the unknown in part because of like female genitalia and the female reproductive system. It's of a more mysterious nature than the male reproductive system. So because of that, like femininity comes to be, I guess it's a women are more associated, like the female is like more associated with like the mystery of reproduction, like the primordial womb, like all that like determines what femininity is on an archetypal level, like the level that would be cross-cultural, the level that would be like most closely associated with our biology, and then everything kind of. So it's not that all women or all females would have these specific characteristics, but it's that femininity archetypally is connected to biology.
Why do you think through a lot of religions, particularly in Judeo-Christianity, does there seem to be sort of, I don't know, a repressive aspect towards women, a negative aspect towards women? It seems like that's a constant or an often repeated and often observed aspect of that tradition. And I'm not sure that's like a lot of people, I think rightly have a problem with that kind of mindset. Was that just a misinterpretation? Like where does that?
Can you give some examples?
I can address.
It's not a very well-formed question, but hopefully y'all can answer it.
Okay, maybe Juan wants an example.
Yeah, because like I don't know what you're talking about specifically. Like I know that people make noise, but like part of the problem is if we're addressing kind of like like if we don't have specific critiques about whatever topic, then we can't really address them.
Well, so Anthony mentioned the Judeo-Christian tradition that's analogous to that's equal to the church, basically. I mean, like I guess before Christ there was Judaism, and then after Christ there was the church, and the church is a very hierarchical, patriarchal structure, and to this day women are not allowed to be priests. So maybe that's an example.
No,
well,
I don't.
Try and be a little more. Go ahead, Ariel. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. I would say, as for examples, one of the main examples, or the most fundamental examples I can think of, is the fact that in the Judeo-Christian, and it's really like the Abrahamic tradition, because it includes like Islam and the Druze and Baha'i and Rastafari. But then the Abrahamic tradition, there's one God, and that God is masculine or male. And so that's a pretty big departure from all previous religions. And you can go into like specifics, like you can go into specifics in the original text, like Paul, who says, wives obey your husbands, slaves obey your masters. That's like a thing you could arguably say is very patriarchal, and it's in the Bible itself. And you can find examples from the Old Testament. And I think the problem with looking at stuff from the church is you can separate the church and the religion. Like it's easy to say that like the church is a corruption of the religion, and it is in various ways. It's hard to see. It's hard to distinguish the ways that the church corrupts the original text and the way that the church authentically embodies the original text.
So are you saying that the original text has God being sort of both male and female, or are you saying that, and that the church corrupts that? Or are you saying
No,
that?
that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying there's different levels of analysis where if you're making the argument that the Abrahamic tradition is sexist, you can look at real life, like the church, how it's been actualized. You can look at the original text, so like specific sexist things it says about men and women, if they exist. But I think the most fundamental thing is the fact that in that tradition, God is pretty unambiguously identified as male or masculine, and with the masculine, and it's a very archetypally masculine character.
Okay, and how does the church corrupt that?
I don't think the church corrupts that. That's not what I was trying to say.
Oh, okay.
But
where's the corruption that was happening? Sorry, I heard you say that.
I think the example you gave of like priests being exclusively male, you can make the argument that that's a corruption of like you don't necessarily know that relates to the original text. You don't necessarily, like the original text doesn't necessarily say that has to be the case. That's not an example.
I would say it's at least conceivable that maybe there's a connection between the God being male and the staff of the religious organization being male.
Yeah, I agree, but I guess I want to kind of get back to Anthony's original question, because about the what was your original question, Anthony? It was about the Judeo-Christian.
So in my question, I think I kind of assumed that that there's sort of a repressive element and aspect against women, sort of a patriarchal, male-dominated sort of overtones to not just the expression of the text in religion, but to the text itself. But maybe we should explore that a little bit and try and see if we can, like Juan said, we need specific, it wasn't a critique, but more maybe specific examples. The first and easiest one would be Eve. Like, who is the one that committed the original sin? Eve is the one that plucked the fruit and gave it to Adam. And that was what, delved humanity into original sin. So in a way, that blame has gotten placed on the feminine as a very deep matter of course of that text and of that tradition.
But you could also lay the blame at the feet of the devil who tempted Eve in the first place.
Or God.
Yeah, I'm not saying we wouldn't.
God, yeah, exactly.
We could lay it at God as well. But no doubt, there's still an element of blame that is clearly placed on Eve, on the feminine, in that story, as well as the devil. And if we think even more broadly, of course, God itself will in the text, it's a he basically.
Yeah, I'm a bit confused about kind of like the underlying assumptions of this conversation, the specific sub conversation we're having, because like if the roles had been reversed in the Bible or in the sort of ancient books, we could have the same argumentation as to why are the roles in the different opposite sort of situation, and it makes me wonder are these ancient stories, are they a description of observed kind of patterns, or are they a prescription as to what ought to be, or what is the purpose of the stories? And I would say that it's sort of like a mix, it's to some degrees to keep order or keep some sort of stability, right? But at the same time, it's sort of dealing with fundamental kind of.
So does Peterson talk about that? Why specifically in that story Eve was picked to eat the fruit before Adam?
Yeah, he kind of does. There's a whole chapter about it.
Okay. All right. I guess I haven't gotten there. You and
yeah, I'm only about
Riane, you guys have both read the book, right?
Yeah, I mean, he basically kind of blames Adam worse than Eve.
Yeah.
But I mean, one, how do you interpret the fact that God is masculine in the Judeo-Christian tradition or in the Abrahamic tradition?
I mean, I haven't read Maps of Meaning, so I've only seen some of the episodes. So I'm not sure I totally sort of get what the underlying sort of foundations of that dichotomy are. But I would sort of say that if God is masculine, which I'm not even sure, I haven't looked at the Bible either to sort of see the exact sort of quotes or what the context of the writing is. But if it is masculine, I would probably say that it's around order and sort of the ordering of the chaos, right? So the only reason why God has sort of emerged as a sort of, and it's a monotheistic God, it's not a sort of a God among gods, it's the God, the ones that you should sort of aim for and ignore the other ones, right? It's not a polytheistic sort of vision of the world.
Yeah, I mean, so
the good order, it's order that is truthful, right? And for some reason, that's like, it's not that God is male, it's that God is sort of masculine, in that it's about the sort of the proper categorization of things. Why is that not feminine? Do the women not, does the feminine not involve in categorization? And I don't know.
Oh, okay, so I think what's important is that the Old Testament God is kind of a tyrant, kind of a dictator. Like he's a hard ass, and that's the tyrannical father. Like he's almost that archetype. And I haven't gotten to the part in the book where he talks about Christianity, but I would assume that that's part of it. Like basically, it is this just masculine force that has all these rules, right? And it has this code that you're supposed to follow, and it's like, everybody must follow this code, and and you better watch out. You better be God fearing. You better watch out if you step out of line.
There's an argument. There's an argument in second wave feminism that there's an argument in second wave feminism that over the course of human history, there was a shift between a more feminine god, originally in horticulturalist and hunter-gatherer societies, like pre-agricultural, most societies had a female god or a feminine god and a great mother archetype. And what happened was, as time went on, societies became agricultural, because agriculturalism kind of is what forces a patriarchal society. Because in a horticulturalist society, when you're tilling with a hand till, anyone can use a hand till to plant a garden. Even a pregnant woman can do that. Once you get into an agricultural society and you have draft animals, it's a pregnant woman can't operate a draft animal. It's it creates a high risk of miscarriage. So you end up with a situation where the men are basically bringing in all the food, and that's where you get the rise of patriarchal society. And you also get a need to reproduce a lot, to have more babies, to have more soldiers, and it creates the dynamic where women become more of a resource than a contributor or than an agent. And so the argument is that as society moved in that direction, that's where you get things like the Marduk story, the Marduk and Tiamat, where it used to be that there was that is probably an evolution of an earlier time where there was a male and female god, or a masculine and feminine god, and then you end up with this story where the feminine god is just the feminine is destroyed. And so you end up with a lot of stories across cultures where a masculine divine archetype destroys a feminine archetype very dramatically. And you see that, in Greek mythology too. And then it's you get to the point with with Judaism or the ancient Israelite religion where with one god, and the feminine is completely absent. And there's traces in the Bible that indicate that there used to be a feminine counterpart to the male god, but she was written out. And so according to this argument, which is a 1970s second wave feminism kind of argument, the ultimate progression of the rise of the patriarchy is the complete absence of the divine feminine and the centering of this sole unitary divine masculine god.
Is that something that serves us or sort of hurts us in the society and culture we find ourselves in today?
It depends what you're aiming for.
So basically what you're saying is that a parallel is drawn between the rise of agriculture and the creation of the universe in a lot of these myths, where, as you said, the female gets defeated or whatever by this male force. Of course, Marduk is I guess he's a male father figure, but he's also the knower. There's the known and the unknown and the knower. So he plays maybe both roles. I think in that story, he plays the role of the knower, but then subsequently he becomes kind of the male father figure. But yeah, basically you're saying the rise of agriculture is almost like the creation of the universe in that sense. But yeah. So going back to what Anthony was saying, so is there a negative to that? Is there basically the divine feminine gets lost, and then stuff?
Well, I asked if it serves us or hurts us, and then Juan said it depends on what you're aiming for.
Yeah. And so I think what happens is stuff is always this process is kind of a dialectic, right? There's the synthesis the thesis and the antithesis, and then the synthesis, right? And so you always have a stable state, which is the Ouroboros, right? The unknown, this kind of thing that's been around forever. And then, so that's the thesis. And then it starts to become unstable. And then it creates its opposite, which is the antithesis. And then they have battles. They have a battle, and then there's this synthesis which comes out, which is the new revolutionary order.
The new homeostasis, the new balance between
exactly the new steady state. Yeah. And so yeah. So basically, the what always happens is the male kind of creates the universe by killing the female or inseminating the female or doing something to the female, and then there's this order that gets created, and things are great for a while. But then the masculine, I shouldn't say male, I should say masculine, gets too tyrannical, and there's too much order, and it stagnates and gets sick, and it starts to die. Yeah. And then it becomes the new Ouroboros or whatever, and then some new thing comes in, and the process repeats.
And it's sort of like you ever see like the asphalt or like the, on the road, and then there's like a sapling sort of growing between the cracks, like that is the structures that ancients created through this sort of, the great conflicts, and it settles, and then there's just this slab of concrete that holds the chaos of around it. But then over time it gets all in the cracks, and then this sort of sapling starts growing, and that is maybe the feminine, right? It is life. It is the new life, right? And then it starts cracking the ancient structure until the tree grows, and the
right, exactly
is just wrecked.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly.
So a new stasis sort of occurs, and it is always that play, right?
Exactly.
Which is why the feminine is the chaos in between the categories to some degree. I mean, that's one example, I guess, right? I don't know.
So how much in today's world?
The problem that I have with it is like with this, the way we're talking about it is that it's not a binary thing. Like the masculine energy can have, like, if you look at masculinity, you can have a tyrannical version of it, and you can have a benevolent version of it. And then if you look at femininity, you can have a benevolent version of it, and you can have a tyrannical version of it. And the sweet spot of the yin yang, like the middle of the yin yang, is when both are benevolent. And the when you're too far into the chaos or too far into the order is when you're within either side of that dichotomy, right? So I was just saying, like, the feminine has like a benevolent and a tyrannical version, and the masculine has a benevolent and a tyrannical version. And the sweet spot, the middle of the yin yang, is when both are benevolent, and that's balance. And then things get unbalanced when the stasis moves a little, because the fundamental sort of like the underlying seismic sort of forces of things sort of move while the stasis is here, right? Like ancient structures lose adaptive, lose their evolutionary adaptive sort of advantage in a sense as things move forward and new things happen, right? And so they become either too tyrannical or too chaotic, right? And so that unstabilizes it, and there's a great conflict of sorts, and the synthesis, hopefully, if it happens, is again back to benevolence for both sides.
Yeah, and that's where, like, according to Jordan Peterson, like the Western innovation is the hero in the middle, like the archetype of the hero who comes from the known, goes into the unknown, and brings something back to the known, like mediates between, like kind of walks the line between the two.
Oh, okay. I haven't gotten to that part yet. So that's why Peterson likes the Western tradition so much. Because it helps to maintain balance between order and chaos, instead of having sort of the old order like metastasize and stagnate and then just fall apart. And then there's just utter chaos. Like once the government falls apart, then you just have chaos, right? Because then everybody's fighting and nobody really knows who's in charge and whatever. But like I guess the Western tradition. I mean, so we've had a lot of really crazy catastrophes in the West. The World Wars and the Napoleonic Wars and the revolutions and the French Revolution. I mean, but really, like, the entirety of civilization hasn't collapsed. And maybe that's the good thing about this Western innovation of the hero.
But it's not just Western, right? Like the Chinese have have done pretty well too.
Yeah.
Chinese, I don't know exactly what they believe, but they probably have echoes of the same thinking. Obviously, we're talking a lot about the yin yang. The yin yang is a sort of Eastern kind of idea, and
Yeah, for sure. And I wonder if there is a lot of that going on right now. There's kind of a lot of Eastern stuff like bleeding over into culture now.
Well, that's the new synthesis, right?
I'm doing yoga teacher training.
So could we look at some of the chaos that exists in society at the moment? Could we look at that as like kind of a healthy part of this cycle?
Yeah.
You know, in turn, like, so in order to bring order, to make growth, the hero has to venture into the unknown. So are we maybe at a place in society right now where it would be useful for us to venture into the unknown, to experiment with different states of culture, to create new traditions and stories, and then at some point to come back towards the other direction? Is that maybe something that the left could actually, some of the leftists might be experimenting with that right now? And certainly in chaos, there's a lot of danger there, but perhaps we'll bring a few new things that are useful and encapsulate that into modern tradition.
What Peterson is trying to do with 12 Rules for Life. He says an antidote to chaos. I guess maybe that's your point.
Yeah, I mean, what I kind of see, so it's not coming to us. Sorry, just like a technical thing. Okay, like what I kind of see is like, so we're talking about before, like there's like the Abrahamic tradition, and like these traditions dominated by the divine masculine come along with like agriculture, which is around the same time that women kind of stop being able to take an active role in the production of food. So that is the state of affairs for like 10,000, 15,000 years. And now we get into a time again where you get like the Industrial Revolution, and like the aftermath of that, like kind of a post-industrial age we're in. You see a situation again where women are once again taking on a productive role. Like, I don't mean like productive and economically productive.
Yeah.
Like we're producing economic value and food, not literal food, but like we're bringing in the food again, like we were in the pre-agricultural time. And so around the same time, you see like the Abrahamic tradition crumbling, or like it's no longer the universal consensus, and it's like it's leaving us in this time of like great like chaos and change, where like the divine masculine, like the divine feminine is like really like asserting itself over like the last century or so. And you see like environmentalism, like this like push towards like equality of all people, a very like most obviously blatantly like women's rights, like freedom for women. And I think what Jordan Peterson is arguing is that it's creating an imbalance in the opposite direction, where like the masculinity and like divine masculine is being like denigrated, and he's trying to like, I think he's
well, there's a huge amount of chaos right now. So one of the things that happened recently was the invention of the birth control pill, which liberated women from their biological sort of
consequences.
Massive biological risk and cost of pregnancy, which is like a life-changing sort of thing that can happen. And so it liberated them from that. But there's also like all these negative consequences, like health consequences from it. There's a lot of infertility, a lot of couples having a hard time sort of having children. And so in a sense, like the feminine, the life of the feminine has sort of been, radically changed by technology. And so now women are, because of World War II and women entering the workforce, and then taxes rising, and then now it's like you kind of have to have both people working, or else you can't sustain a household because of all kinds of economic and sort of tyrannical state things, and arguably, right? Then the women are taking a sort of more masculine role, in the sense like you have to go out there and be in conflict with other people, and not be sort of in a compassionate sort of caretaking kind of role, which is maybe more. I mean, maybe this is sexist or something, but it seems to me like that's more of a feminine role, more sort of relationship oriented, that sort of than kind of like that competitive sort of get to the top, sort of hunt the animal type of role. And so women are sort of kind of being incentivized or sort of pushed towards a masculine, and going, to some degree, going to a more masculine sort of space. And then at the same time, like the masculine is being attacked by all these sort of different cultural forces, right? And so men are becoming more feminine, right? So women are becoming more masculine, becoming more feminine, and everything just kind of like weird. And that's the chaos that I think we're sort of. That's what I'm seeing. I don't know. I mean, like,
but for me, like you say, oh, there's a huge amount of chaos, and I don't.
It's cultural. It hasn't been. The problem is that it hasn't been politicized effectively yet. But like we're seeing it in politics, and so people are going back to culture to try to talk about it and figure out what's going on. There's this idea by Andrew Breitbart that politics is downstream from culture, which makes perfect sense because culture is more around like the sort of the psychological general consensus.
Well,
whereas politics is like infrastructure and enforcement, regardless of X or whatever, right?
Yeah. So going back to earlier, so. This drive towards the liberty movement, like the freedom movement, is kind of almost like the chaos movement, right? Which makes me think, oh, maybe this is the divine feminine asserting itself. Like maybe like us, these crypto people, like maybe that's the divine feminine. Maybe we're like on that side of the coin, at least politically right now.
Well, in terms of chaos, I don't see so much chaos as existing in necessarily the order or our day-to-day lives. In fact, if anything, our lives have far more order. Like the house that we're sitting in, right, has been a construction of a lot of industrious orderliness. However, on a sort of mental aspect, on a psychological aspect, I think it is true that we're seeing a lot more chaotic manifestations in people's mentality across the whole of society. Which is, that's probably a good thing in a way. And certainly when we talk about chaos, it's only a very small percentage, a very tiny fraction of that chaos that we actually find something good and then we take that and use it. Generally, experimentations are characterized by failure after failure until you get that one shining moment of success. And that's kind of the whole purpose. That's the whole point of chaos. You have so much variety, so much randomness and variability that you have to go explore it and then find the one thing amongst the sea of things that you don't need, and bring back that one thing.
Yeah.
So there's
one thing I find that there's so much craziness out there in terms of we like to talk about that. So like use that as our punching bag maybe. One thing that I really personally I think we could benefit from as a society is more exploration into this chaos. Not necessarily the type of chaos that a lot of leftists are experimenting with. They've gone too far, and I think at this point some corrective action is needed to assert to recognize the biological realities. But I still see a lot of the old traditions, many aspects of those traditions still need to be changed, and maybe we haven't found suitable replacements. And maybe they don't need to be changed entirely, but they need to be adjusted. They need to be updated. And so I think we still have a lot more exploration in this sort of chaotic realm, to find the things that will adequately integrate into the traditions that we have, to take the good parts of those traditions and modify them for everyone's benefit.
Right, and this is what I was going to say. So also, from the standpoint of the established order, the world probably looks increasingly chaotic. Because from that perspective, what's happening is all very unknown. But they're causing it. They're causing it because they become too rigid in their thinking. And so what the decentralized movements on the internet are helping is, as you were saying, Anthony, is helping explore that unknown territory. And to the established order, exploring that unknown territory is very scary, because traditionally those territories should not be explored. That's part of the mythology, is that, oh my God, like, all these different new types of sexualities, all these new types of gender identification, that's very scary to the established order, because it's like upending their version of reality. But I think it's part of the background nature, that they're ignoring, and because they're ignoring it, it's coming up to bite them in the butt.
So like in some of these sort of ancient traditions, I think it's an Egyptian one, the father or the you know the king, right? The old king is blind, and then his son or the prince, the rising prince that might become the new king, obviously can see and stuff. And there's a movie that I was watching. It was an Egyptian movie that came out recently. Very good.
Yeah, Horus and Osiris.
What was it called?
So Osiris is the king, and he loses an eye and goes to hell.
Yeah,
and
what was the movie?
What's that?
What was the movie called?
Oh, I don't know about the movie. I'm just talking about the mythology.
Right. Yeah, and so go ahead.
And then so Horus goes out somewhere, and he does kind of the hero thing, and he gets the eye, and then he goes to the underworld, and he rescues his father and gives his father one of his eyes.
So what happens? The way that I saw the movie was okay. So there's the king, he's blind, and then there's the son who's going to ascend the throne. But there's a brother that sort of was exiled or left, and then he comes back and fights both of them and kicks everybody's ass, and then takes his brother's eye and basically hides it somewhere. And then the prince.
That's so the Lion King.
It's the same story. It's the same story as the Lion King and the same story as Hamlet. It's like they keep telling the same story.
Yeah. You know, he's got a big scar on his eye.
Right. Yeah, and so then this other kid comes and like sort of inspires the prince to go sort of find the eye. So he goes, finds the eye, but instead of putting it on, he takes it to his father and gives it to his father, and then rejuvenates the ancient. And that's because the ancient was created way back when the environment was X, and now the environment has sort of turned into X plus Y or whatever, and so now it's different. And so the ancient structure can't see the new environment exactly, and so it's maladaptive. And in that conflict is where the chaos happens. And so the process of synthesis is the rejuvenation of the ancient structure, which is the prince rising to be the new king with the new vision until he becomes old and blind again, and so the cycle.
Right, and this really made me think about Trump too, because it seems like at least to the sort of dominant media structure, the election of Trump to the president of the United States is kind of like Scar getting elected president of Pride Rock. You know, it's kind of just like, oh my God, there's this evil guy, and what's he gonna do? And he's making everything horrible, and everybody's losing hope. And like, we just need somebody to come back and restore order and vision. Correctness.
It's also like the jokester, the comedian, the trickster becoming the hero. Because Trump before that was like this sort of playboy billionaire comedian that went on like the roast show where he gets roasted, and he just, he's a funny kind of trolly guy, and then suddenly he's like, all right, I'm going serious, and then boom, right? So he becomes the hero. That's another story.
Yeah, it's like the whole thing is so tricky because it's like it's not clear to any individual, I don't think, like where the synthesis is. Like we're talking about like the Hegelian thing kind of, where it's like things are one way and there's like this challenge and there's going to be this whole new structure, but it's like we're still living in like the shell of like the old world, like the old patriarchal world where everything is like orderly and things like work a certain way, and we're still living within those structures. It's like you were saying before, it's like there's a cultural shift happening, and like the structure of society is kind of downstream from that. We're already feeling some changes, and it's like, and I think someone like Jordan Peterson, he sees like that some of like these cultural changes that are being like floated right now have the potential to collapse the order that we all take for granted.
Yeah, and part of the problem, and part of the danger with that is that the old order saw something. Like this is something that I've been thinking about lately. Is like the old order, the old barriers, and sort of built and raised by our ancestors were built because there was a threat. There was a thing coming that was dangerous, so they just sort of built a wall. And then they dealt with the problem, because the wall's high enough, and then we all grow up seeing like, what the fuck's that wall for? Then we don't see the chaos on the other side. Always see stories, and we see them benefiting from the structure they created. And it's like, greedy motherfuckers, just lower the wall so people can come in or whatever.
Yeah.
And then, but what may happen when we tear down those ancient structures is that, yes, turns out that the monster on the other side has become smaller or is not that dangerous, but maybe there's still some stuff out there
Yeah, yeah.
It's
That
down.
actually totally reminds me.
You see it in the crypto space all the time, right? Like everybody's like, oh, the financial system is too elitist, and free the markets, free the world.
Yeah,
And so
let's just tear it all down.
and now there's like 80%
Yeah.
of them are scams, and people are here and there are losing money, but they're also learning about finance and entering the new financial system.
Right.
There's like both, right? There's chaos and fraud, but there's also like huge opportunity and potential and new ways to capitalize startups, and then there's sort of the more sort of organized, sort of steady thing, which is Bitcoin, right?
Right. And another thing that this totally reminds me of is the thing that's going on with Russia right now, because a lot of our foreign policy over the last, since World War II has been to kind of defend against this threat of Russia, right? Or communism at the time, but now it's Russia. And so now we have all these people who are like, oh my God, we hate Russia. We don't trust Russia. They're evil bastards. They're trying to spy on us and affect our election and stuff. And it's the same shit that was happening in the 1950s. I mean, remember McCarthy? It's like literally like, oh my God, there's Russians everywhere and they're spying on us and they're doing things. And it's like, yeah. And maybe there is something there. Maybe there is a reason to distrust the Russians or something like that. But I think a lot of that is just kind of leftover paranoia from an earlier age.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty convinced on that. I'm friends with I've met a few Russians in the crypto community. It's pretty fun, and they're all coming from like a sort of emerging sort of new world kind of like republic, sort of capitalist republic of sorts. Like it's definitely like Russia's is no liberal democracy, right? But it's got a fair amount of like capitalist sort of freedom and stuff. And the people that I've met are sort of very much sort of they're not communists, right? They're not like that hard old guard sort of like destroy everything and 100% egalitarianism type of thing. Right. Which sounds great on the surface, but ended up in this massive sort of
right. I mean, their society has transformed massively since the Berlin Wall fell, and yeah, so they're kind of like maybe the
blind kings. They're the blind kings.
Yeah. Okay, but I mean, in terms of like the Russia thing, from what I can see, there is like Russia has very real imperial ambitions that have been like obvious since the early 2000s, like Crimea, Georgia, and like the Balkans, and let me finish. And like the main thing preventing it from realizing those imperial ambitions is the NATO alliance. And now like Trump is kind of undermining the NATO alliance. Like this seems like a pretty, like from Russia's perspective, like I guess it's like.
Sorry, you cut out there for like 5 seconds.
Those imperial ambitions are okay. I don't really like. It does seem like there's some criticism or containment of Russia is.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say that they're probably okay. Like I look at like I haven't been to Russia, but the Russians that I've met and what I've seen of Russia so far, Russians and Americans have a huge amount in common, and they have disagreements in certain areas, and certainly a lot of it, the disagreements seem to be around like civil rights. Like there's certain disagreements around civil rights. So the West is a lot more liberal than Russia, but Russia is it's still kind of like moving towards the sort of free market and moving towards a kind of Americanism, right? And so yeah, from Trump's perspective, why is America funding NATO when all this very expensive military infrastructure around the Europe and around the world, when all those countries are benefiting from it and not paying America back? And this is his sort of the way he puts it. And so he's just saying like, well, we're just going to take that back if you're not going to sort of, cover some of the funds. And also those ancient threats are kind of gone now. And these guys are here doing business.
They're so not though. They're so not though. Like here's the thing that's dangerous. And if you guys have like counter arguments to this, that would be like amazing, because I'm not sure this is accurate, but from what I can see, so there's the NATO alliance, and the NATO alliance is basically like if any NATO country is attacked, then every single other NATO country like is right there defending that country, declaring war on the country that attacked them.
Right.
So if attacks a Balkan country, if Russia attacks like Lithuania, then they're facing the United States. And that's like the idea of the NATO alliance. It's supposed to be like 100%, we have your back, like no question. If Russia attacks Lithuania, it's like it's at war with the United States.
Right.
Russia doesn't attack Lithuania because it knows that if that happens, 100% it's facing the United States. So what's going on now with Trump, where he's like, well, maybe we'll help, maybe we won't, but you guys have to hold your share and like, contribute, and like otherwise, like who knows what's going to happen. Now it's like from Russia's perspective, if they attack Lithuania, maybe they're 50% facing the United States. So it's like a completely different utilitarian calculus from their perspective.
Right.
And that's the argument why people say that like this undermining the NATO alliance is dangerous, because for one thing, it weakens that whole block of countries. And it makes it so that from Russia's perspective, maybe it's worth the risk. Maybe it's worth the risk to attack Lithuania. Maybe it's worth the risk to try to take the Balkans. And if the United States does end up supporting them, then it's like, you could end up in a situation where there is a war between Russia and the United States, or you can end up with a situation where Russia is just like able to realize its imperial ambitions in the region.
So the thing checking Russian imperial ambitions is American Western imperial ambitions? Because it seems undeniable to me that the West, particularly America, has its own imperial ambitions as well. As does China, as do all the world global superpowers. I guess I don't consider that necessarily a great thing. In my personal ideal world, people wouldn't have ambitions to take over their neighbors. In terms of thinking about sort of NATO versus Russia.
Okay, let me ask you an annoying question. So would you like your vision of a non-imperialist world to be adopted by the rest of the world?
As long as, to the extent that it's sort of non-interventionist, non-violent, leaving people alone unless they're attacked, right? Unless you have to help someone defend themselves. Mm-hmm. But yeah, overall, you could say that. Yeah,
so from an ideas perspective, as long as the means are not, let's say objectable or at least let's say as long as it's through conversation and discourse and then you want your vision to expand across the world and in a sense become sort of the statuses, right? And
sort of become what? I'm sorry?
Because you believe it's true, and I'm with you there. And that's the question, right? And so like there's this idea like the American vision, and then there's the American imperial sort of efforts, right? Mm-hmm. And there's two ways to reach that. One is to export and sell the culture. The other one is to conquest, is to conquer and to destroy and other states and rebuild, implants to the liberal democracies in there.
Isn't that a contradiction though on its face? If you become imperialist to export your ideas of freedom, haven't you just completely negated your own ideas of freedom?
I agree with you on that. Yeah, I think you're right about that.
But I don't think
anyone's
I don't think anyone's advocating for like U.S. imperial, conquest of the world. Like it almost seems like it feels like this argument of like okay, of course we let Russia take over the Ukraine and the Balkans and Georgia because the United States sucks. So like we can't do anything about it because we're guilty. Like Western guilt, but it's like I can easily imagine a scenario where the NATO alliance is intact, the U.S. is not invading other countries, which I definitely disagree with. It's not topple other governments, but it's still containing Russia, not by like invading them and being aggressive, but just by having a solid alliance with the countries it might aggress.
I guess I personally wouldn't agree with the notion that Russia has been acting extraordinarily imperialistically. Not because they wouldn't, and given the opportunity, but just because they're trying to set a counterexample to American imperialism. So if we want to talk about Crimea, that was a pretty clear-cut case of a very massive percentage of the population asking Russia to join the Russian Federation because their government had been usurped by a military coup that was funded by the State Department of the United States in its attempt at imperialism itself. So I'm not saying that Putin is a good guy. I'm not saying that he wouldn't act imperialistically on the opportunities that he can. But so far in the actions, I've seen more resistance to American imperialism than necessarily Russia acting imperialistically themselves.
So have you guys read the WikiLeaks files by Julian Assange? Or heard of it?
I haven't.
Okay, so he talks about American imperialism. He actually talks about the U.S. empire. And the way that it operates is basically American companies go to other countries which are outside of the American jurisdiction basically, and they just go and they set up shop and they start doing business, and then the State Department of the U.S. protects the interests of those companies overseas. And so what you get is the U.S. government is kind of an agent of large American corporations. And the way that they spread their culture is they do business. They do business in other parts of the world, and eventually that brings with it the protection of the American military, and so that's how it spreads. And so Russians and other cultures around the world see this as a threat to their culture, even though it's not violent or military. At least at first, it kind of becomes that way in the steady state in the long term. And so I'm American, and I would love to see the entire world just adopt American culture, just because that's where I'm from. I think the best solution is for us to take the best elements of all the cultures and form a global culture out of that. But what will happen as a consequence of spreading American culture globally is that the U.S. military will be responsible for protecting all of those countries. And so it's kind of sneaky what America does, but at the same time, it's basically the most peaceful way, in my opinion. But again, I could be biased because I'm American.
Uh-huh. Well, I'm a big fan of American culture in some sense. Libertarianism came from the United States, and a lot of sort of like, things like Bitcoin, I think is very much imbued with Western values in many ways, even though it's a universal thing.
Even though Satoshi was Japanese.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe.
I might somewhat slightly take issue with the concept, with the notion of Western values. I think one of the values, if there is a Western value, diversity would be one of them. But inherent in that means that there's actually quite a number of different values wrapped up into Western.
I wouldn't say that diversity is a Western value. More that it's more like race and color and all these things are actually not what makes somebody good, but it is the sort of their commitment to goodness, or it is the ideas in a sense, and by holding a bar that's at the ideas realm rather than the color realm, then it welcomes people that are willing to play that game, and so you end up with what looks like diversity, but it's not that diversity is the value. That's sort of like a consequence of it.
I could concede the point about maybe diversity not being a Western value, but my general point is that I'm not sure if we can say that there is such a thing as Western values, because there's so many different people. The cultures, even if we don't value diversity, the truth is the cultures have a lot of diversity to them. It's kind of like, it's like when Jordan Peterson talks about, when he says, listen, you don't speak for all homosexuals, okay? You don't speak for all transgendered people. I don't believe that just because you're a homosexual that anything, that what you say is representative of the general population. And I tend to not really think that there is actually a Western culture necessarily, that there are Western values. Because there's people, obviously everyone's arguing, right? Like we have a nation divided, so.
There's Western civilization. It's like, I think there's a difference between a culture and an identity group that's based on like a biological variation or something like that. Like it's like a culture. It's like Islamic civilization. Like if you look at Islamic civilization, like at a certain period in time, like in like the 1400s, you go through the Middle East and pass through like three entirely different empires that were all Muslim, and in each one there was like different cultures. But it was still the case that a person could go through all three and speak the same language group, be understood, there was still a cultural similarity. And similarly, like if you were like in Europe in like the 1700s, you could go from like Britain to France to Spain to Italy to Portugal. You could go through all the different countries of Europe. You come to the United States, you come to all the places in the world that were part of Western civilization, and you could be understood. Even if there was a language difference, there was a cultural similarity, and that wouldn't be present if you were to go to like China. There's
the defining feature of Western culture, according to I believe Jordan Peterson, and if not, just somebody in the intellectual dark web, I don't remember, is the predominance of of individual rights over collective rights. So basically, the individual matters more than the collective. If the collective is going to take away the individual's rights, then that collective, is evil.
I don't see that though. I see a huge contingent of the population that believes the exact opposite of that. I in fact think that if you go to Russia,
Well, traditionally,
and maybe I could confirm with my Russian friends on this, but you'll hardly find a communist in Russia. I've been told that there are very, very few communists left in Russia, and the ones that are, they're kind of old people.
Yeah,
I'm talking about
you're more likely to find a communist here in the West, in Europe, a communist socialist in the United States, in Europe, than you are to find it in Russia.
It's not about everybody in the civilization believing the same thing, especially now when we're in a time of change and chaos and upheaval.
Yeah, I'm not saying that all Russians are communists. I'm saying the defining feature of Western culture is this. It's like as viewed from above, you know, maybe not as viewed from below, but like, yeah. Sorry, Ariel.
But there's a huge contingent of people that completely believe the opposite of that thing that you just said. They believe in the rights of the collective above that of the individual. That's a very common.
That's the point. That's the point, Anthony. It's the exact opposite, and that's what's interesting. It's not necessarily about what the specific value or belief is. It's about what the questions are. And there's the question of individualism is so central to Western civilization that you have people being like individualism and people being like no individualism. But it's like the central question. It's not like it's like everyone. It's like a very charged issue because of the history of the West, because we have that concept because we have that hero in the middle, like we were talking about before, the divine feminine and the divine masculine. There's the hero in the middle that navigates the line, and that's the Western innovation. And that structure, that hero in the middle, is such like a touchstone that you have people who are like, it's all about the hero, and you have people like, we have to kill the hero.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's
so then you're saying that
another defining feature is how much everybody argues.
I want to make sure I understand that point real quick before we go on. So you're saying that Western culture is characterized and defined by asking that question of collectivism versus individualism, that's one of the defining characteristics of Western culture? Isn't that kind of,
like,
sorry, go ahead.
Like have you guys seen the film The Lobster? It's this film that's like it's about the society where the main value of the society is that everyone has to be part of a couple, and like and people who are part of a couple have like all the power, and people who are single are like hated, and like the rebels are people who are like, we're going to be single no matter what, and couples are evil, and we're never going to be part of a couple. And it's like it's just like it's like funny because it's like it shows like the main question of that society determines like this like massive polarity, and everyone like falls upon this like extreme. It's like that's what I'm kind of saying, like with Western civilization, it's like it's not about what everyone believing one thing, it's about the questions that produce these like polarities.
Right. That's what I was going to say.
I feel like those
the defining feature is that everybody gets to fight over politics. Everybody gets to have their voices heard, and probably the person who screams the loudest is the person that gets heard. But everybody potentially has their viewpoint is valued.
I guess I see that question as not specific and unique to the West. I see that as a general question that humanity asks itself, both in tribes and in civilization. What rights do people have? How much do we sacrifice to the collective? And how do we go about asking those questions? I guess I don't see that as specific to the West. I see it as generic to humanity.
But in the West, people feel like their opinion is valued.
I wouldn't say that individual versus collective is the only question, but it does seem to be one of them. I mean, one of the frustrating things with the way that the challenge you're posing, Anthony, is that one thing is the current individuals and maybe like the current establishment of the current majority of living, adults. And another thing is the sort of the majority of individuals before us and the infrastructure that they've built and the spirit of that infrastructure, which continues to carry on their will, if you will. And if you look at it from that macro perspective, there is certain parallels, right? And to me, like the Constitution is such an excellent example of what those values are, because that was the synthesis at the time after a great conflict. And it was free speech, it was gun freedoms, and it was like, due process and a bunch of other things that if you ask any libertarian, they'll be like, yeah, that's probably a good thing. And if you ask, but obviously like there's branches of the left that won't think that all of that is horrible. And so today that's the conflict, right? But that's the history of the West, the sort of things like that, like it's sort of common law and contract law. It's the spirit of the thing. Now, whether the implementation was tyrannical or too tyrannical is sort of kind of a separate question, something that libertarians debate a lot.
Human rights is something that the entire world thinks about, though. We have the United Nations, which is composed of most nations of the earth, and the United Nations has a Declaration of Human Rights as well. I don't think gun ownership is one of those necessarily, but things like free speech are encoded and valued in that too. I guess I significantly, and I don't think it's an insignificant
led by the West, though. Let's be real.
Is that I think it's important to recognize that Western culture is not one thing. I don't think that that's a reasonable characterization. I think we can either say, okay, humanity has tendencies, biological tendencies, which exist both in our traditions and in our brain and our mental structures. But I think it's actually hugely divisive to think in terms of Western culture versus Eastern. I think that actually is the same fallacy as trying to act like a homosexual, like just because you're a homosexual, that means you speak for all homosexuals. Just because we're Westerners doesn't mean that we speak for all Western culture. I'm not saying there aren't differences. Certainly there are differences between what we could call Westerners and other geographic locations. I'm just saying that I don't want to skip straight away pretending that Western culture is this thing when it's really composed of a variety of things.
Obviously, every culture is made up of lots of individuals who all have their own opinions on things. But a narrative emerges from the culture. And I would say that there is a Western narrative that we tell how we define ourselves to people who are not in a Western culture. And I would say that Eastern cultures are the same. They define themselves as Eastern, and they have certain things that they would say in that narrative, which differ from the things that we would say in our narrative.
I agree. Certainly there's differences. There are differences between cultures. At the same time, we have a lot of intermixing. There are a lot of people born and raised in Russia and China and all these different places.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of combination happening for sure. Yeah. I actually have to talk about you guys.
I wonder, do you guys know about the history of sort of how China and because I mean, Japan, like First World War, Second World War, they were kind of really hardcore. And then there was a war, and then they lost. They got nuked by the States. The States came in, started rebuilding infrastructure. And then Japan now is a very Western country.
Right.
I know where China is on that. I know that they're technically still a communist state, but it's funny how what I've studied as far as China goes, like the way that the government worked before recently was, people are just doing their thing. And then whenever people do something that the government doesn't like, the government goes like, right? They're patient, bad attack, patient, bad attack, right? And so it's this like hovering sort of power structure. And then recently they came out as they were expanding and they built this sort of massive road that goes through Russia and stuff in Europe. They're building it. They say, well, we're no longer a sort of kind of communist dictatorship of sorts. We are a country, a nation of laws, a nation of laws, and that means that there's a judicial system, there's a judicial branch, and there's precedent law, and then sort of rules kind of get built and whatever, right? And there's like a political process. At least on the face of it, they said in a very public forum. And so that's a Westerner idea, and that's post World War II, post the fall of China, of like Mao, and right. And so regardless of where the geographical sort of places are today, are they now sort of kind of implementing ideas that originated in sort of Judeo-Christian kind of Greek tradition? And the answer,
I would hardly say that the concept of law originates there, though. Like, I think it could hardly be said that the concept of law and adherence to it originates as a Western Judeo-Christian mindset. Laws and codes have been around since we could write. And this is I think something that's generalized to humanity, not just a Western thing. And actually, so talking about Japan, talking about South Korea, I'd like to expand on that analogy a little bit. I worked at Samsung, which is a Korean company, and we had a lot of expats come over, and it was really interesting to get to observe the perspective, the cultural differences between us and the South Koreans. So we might say South Korea is a westernized country, right? The same kind of thing happened with South Korea as happened with Japan. But what you find in their culture is a very much an adherence to the collective, sort of self-imposed adherence to the wishes of the collective. You don't really get out of line. If your elder tells you something, you do what they say. Maybe in America here, we have a lot more challenges towards established hierarchical structures, but in Korea, though we might call it Western, and this is, I'm pretty sure, true with Japanese culture as well, though we might call it Western, there's still a very significant adherence to the collective, to what the government has to tell you to do.
Right, and that was my point earlier, that kind of the defining feature of Western culture is that the individual matters more than the collective. And South Korea sounds like it's kind of moving in that direction, because I guarantee before, you know, the U.S. went in and westernized it, it was probably a lot more that way.
Case in point, North Korea, by the way.
Case in point, North Korea.
The Korean Peninsula was colonized by Japan at the beginning of the century. So it was like,
which one?
Japan. The whole Korean Peninsula was colonized by Japan. So it's but anyway, I think, like, Anthony, like, this whole, I've heard this argument before that there's no such thing as culture, but it's like, I don't think you're wrong.
I'm not making that argument. I didn't say that. That would be total mischaracter. I didn't say it.
It is kind of the terminal point, though, of your argument, isn't it? That, like, there's like
it's not. Nope.
Okay,
No. I'm not saying that there's not culture.
That's kind of what I heard too.
That's not my point.
I have a direct question.
I'm just saying that there's limitations to being able to characterize everybody in the West as Western culture. I think there's we can make some broad characterizations.
Obviously not everybody.
But I still don't.
Everybody doesn't like follow, you know, the 600 rules of Western culture.
Like, are you really?
Yeah, I think we pretty explicitly said that, like, a few times that, like, it clearly not everyone in the West, like, there's Westerners that convert to Buddhism, and especially today when, like, everything is becoming so globalized, like, it's pretty obvious that, like, individually, like, people are becoming more, like, eclectic. Okay, like, the way I see it, there's like you're saying, like, there's like this the base level of, like, stuff that's common to all humans, and that's like the biology and, like, the archetypal questions and thought elements, that concepts that emerge based on our reality of the fundamental reality of being human. And there's just things that emerge across all cultures, like kind of like a universal grammar in language, but culturally. And that's like the archetypes. So the archetypes exist in all cultures. But then on top of that, you have these, like, a few major directions that humans went into. Like, humans went into a few very different geographical directions. And from that, you get, like, these very broad, different categories of culture. So there's, like, the West, there's, like, the culture of the Americas, there's, like, what do you call it, Eastern or, like, Asian culture. There's, like, the Australian Aboriginals have, like, a very unique culture that, like with, like, the dream world, like dream world and stuff like that, like, is different from any other culture in the world. Like, they went in a different direction where they placed so much emphasis on, like, dreams spiritually. And it's like those differences are real. Like, those differences are real. Like, there's a way in which Britain and France are more similar than either is historically. They're more similar than either is to China. Like, they're both influenced by a common tradition.
Hey guys.
I think one point that's
I gotta take off. It's been an awesome conversation, and I hope you continue with the amazing stuff.